Welcome and thank you for joining us on DisrupTV, episode 150. And my name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce and your co-host for the next hour. We welcome you to follow us on Twitter at DisrupTV Show. Send Ray, myself, and our distinguished guests your questions live using hashtag DisrupTV, and we'll do our best to answer them. It's my privilege to introduce my co-host. He's the CEO and founder of Constellation Research, best-selling author of Disrupting Digital Business, regular contributor to Harvard Business Review, ZDNet. I now often see him on CNBC and Fox Business. And in my humble opinion, one of the top futurists to follow on Twitter at RWANG0. Welcome, Ray Wang, to DisrupTV.
Well, hey, thanks a lot. I'm here with my co-host, Vala Afshar, one of the wisest followers on Twitter and social media. You can see him everywhere. He's the chief digital evangelist at Salesforce, but more importantly, he is one of the top followers for CIOs and CMOs around the world. He just gave an awesome keynote yesterday in New York for NASSCOM, and a whole bunch of huge other issues coming around. And also check out his books and blogs and other things on ZDNet. But it's not about us. It's really about the cool guests that we bring on board. And who do we have today to kick it off, Paula?
It's our privilege to have Omar Abbosh, Chief Executive of Accenture's Communication, Media, and Technology Operating Group, and a member of Accenture's Global Management Committee. Omar is responsible for Accenture's work serving the digital platforms, media, telecommunications, semiconductor, and consumer electronics industries, including building Accenture's alliances with major technology companies. Before being appointed to the current position, Omar served as Accenture's Chief Strategy Officer with responsibility for overseeing all aspects of the company's strategy, innovation programs, investments, and mergers and acquisitions. In his role, he orchestrated Accenture's own digital transformation, pivoting the company's core business to digital, cloud, and security services, which now account for 60% of Accenture's revenues. Omar's new book, Pivot to the Future, shows how companies can discover value and create growth. I'm going to talk a lot about that during the show. You can follow Omar on Twitter at OMARABBOSH. Welcome, Omar, to DisrupTV.
Thanks, Vala. Thanks, Ray. It's great to be with you guys. I appreciate that. A very kind intro. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot.
I had to shorten it.
That was a great intro. I had to shorten this. I was there yesterday at the event that you had in San Francisco. It was a wonderful event. That was a wonderful discussion. You had Adam Lashinsky and Will I Am on a panel at the same time. I was going to ask a question, but I didn't get to ask. So I finally get you here on DisrupTV to ask. But think about this: 52% of the Fortune 500 merged, acquired, gone bankrupt, fallen off the list since 2000. Massive transformation, and we talked about that in 2009. That was a decade ago, and yet the response to business disruption seems to have faltered for a lot of people. Why is that, and why haven't they thought through how to pivot instead?
So, Ray, I think as you know, and I'm sure the audience knows, the issues vary by industry and by country. It's not the same everywhere. And actually, if I think around the clients I spend time with nowadays, every CEO, every C-suite, they get that digital, AI, blockchain, artificial, all these things are a very big deal, and that they need to do something about them. And in fact, most big corporations, and I'm talking about, big multinationals around the world, whether in the US or Europe or China or wherever, they all are grappling with these issues, and they are experimenting with modern technology. You'll hear tons of talk about proof of concepts and MVPs inside these big corporations. The bit that hasn't totally tipped, if you like, where people haven't fully cracked the code, is actually, even though I'm making big investments in innovation across the business, how do I harness that innovation to really create brand new value and new sources of growth? And that has been a problem area for many companies, not all, but for many companies. And so, in the book, we talk a little bit about, well, actually, what is the playbook? How to manage that, and what are the people who are succeeding doing that's different from the rest?
Yeah, so the new book is titled Pivot to Future, Discovering Value and Creating Growth in a Disrupted World. And it took 2+ years for you to write this book. It's based on Accenture's own experience of reinventing itself in the face of disruption. You also had real world clients that you worked with. And again, a rigorous 2-year study of thousands of businesses. So it's based on proven effective strategies of reinvention in this book. So one, why did what was the catalyst for you writing the book? And then throughout this 2-year rigorous process of trying to recognize patterns for success, are there 1 or 2 key takeaways that you can share with us?
Yeah, Vala, thank you very much. I mean, I'll jump in to answer those, but just one quick full disclosure. So firstly, I was only the co-author. I had 2 amazing co-authors, Paul Nunez and Larry Downs, who are absolutely brilliant at writing and helped with the core research and the thinking. And actually, the story we tell is actually the story of our late chairman and CEO, Pierre Nanterme, who guided Accenture through this period, and the whole management team. And that's, 24 outstandingly brilliant leaders who drove the whole thing. And that's what the story is really about. Now, in terms of why we wrote the book, honestly, our clients were crying out for it. In every conversation we were having, people were like, yeah, this digital thing's a big deal. I've been on a digital safari to Silicon Valley, or I've been to Shenzhen, or I've been to Berlin, but how do I bring my organization? How do I execute? How do we make this part of our DNA of what we do? And what are the lessons that are out there? And, building on the research, on our learnings of our own business. I mean, Accenture is a publicly listed business. We also have to deliver the quarterly results, and stay relevant and change. And of course, our experiences working with many of the world's big companies, we synthesized all of that to try and help our clients say, well, here's what you do about it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know we're seeing those shifts, right? And when you think about this, right, they're also, I mean, inside your chapter, you had a whole bunch of things about commonly held business beliefs to drive growth that don't cut it anymore, right? And when you think about those, what are some of those things that people think? I mean, because people are running these playbooks for quite some time, and there's this notion of how do we jumpstart growth, right? I mean, this whole notion of transformation was just one part of the equation. There's a bigger question is, can we get to sustainable growth?
Yeah, I mean, so Ray, let me dig into that a bit and also touch a bit on Vala's point about patterns. I mean, I think we all grew up in a world of strategy that said a company builds a competitive advantage and then defends it. And there were a whole series of management frameworks that we all grew up with, like long-term strategic planning, like once-off business transformation, like fast following, like milking your cash cow. Like investing in innovation at the edge of the business because the mothership will kill the new stuff. And actually what we've learned is those things don't work. And they don't work today because the rate of change in technology and innovation is changing market and industry structures much more quickly than in the past. Those strategy frameworks I just hinted at were designed in an era where the rate of change in industry and market structures was slow. Today it's quick. And so, to pick an example, I'm sitting here in the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, and there's no question that margin and profit and value is migrating from hardware to software to platform. And we see that not only in the ICT industries, we see it across all the industries. If you go and look at companies like Bosch and Siemens and GE, these in Schneider Electric, these are industrial companies, they're putting software in their hardware and they're connecting it to the world and allowing them to create different use cases. The old logic of strategy doesn't work in that era. So, what does work is recognizing that disruption comes from innovation, and innovation is accelerating. And no company, not one, not even the most strong company in the world, can invest in all the modern innovation all at once. So leadership have to make very smart calls about, well, which innovations am I investing in and driving value from? So I don't allow too much of a gap to emerge between the actual value I'm creating from innovation and the potential value creation that new innovation brings. Because that gap is what we call trapped value, and it attracts disruptors. So if there's like one lesson, it's to survive disruption is treating innovation as a real long-term game and building it out in every phase of the company, not just the new bit of the company, but the old part of the business and the now part of the business as well as the new. And that's the heart of
so the POC and that tiger team that just jumps in, flies in, parachutes in and leaves, can't do that anymore.
Well, I mean, you have to experiment. And the logic of, run loads of experiments, fail fast. I mean, all of that is still true, but that's not where most people get stuck. They get stuck with scaling. I mean, building an MVP is painful, but putting an MVP in 3,000 stores is really hard. And that scaling issue is where people tend to get stuck.
When this execution piece is a hard part to do.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. It is. And again, back to reasons of, you started the call with like, why are we not, dealing so much with business disruption? I mean, there are some very good reasons. It's like, if you're running a big corporation today, you've got something called budgets. And those budgets are in your core business because that's where you make all your profit. And they're fueling the ongoing growth of the core business, even if it's not super big growth, but it's growth. But you know, as a leadership team, that there's a new business emerging. The question is, how do you get the money for that? Because there's no more money. You're still the same money as yesterday. So now you've got to take money out of the core business and get it into the new business. And that brings you to, you know, how do I manage cost? How do I manage power? How does my budgeting and allocation process work in my company? And so the whole, you know, loads of questions of capital allocation is, you know, one thing. And then the other part, of course, is the human part, people. You know, the top leaders of companies grew up being successful at what they do in running bits of the core business. And they're awesome at it. And in fact, you know, the 20th Century Corporation was optimized perfectly for efficiency around those rules.
Yep.
The problem is the rules change, but the mindsets maybe haven't changed as fast. And how you bring leadership and people with you is a big part of the story as well.
Let's talk about people and leadership. We've had your Chief Information Officer, Andrew Wilson, on the show. We've had Paul Daugherty, your Chief Technology Innovation Officer, who's the author of the Technology Vision Report. That's incredibly insightful, an absolute must read for any executive in any business, any industry. And my point of view with these two leaders as an example, they both have a beginner's mindset. You know, they're curious, they're interested, they're present. They're both incredibly humble. Set aside the courage and intelligence that they both have, but there's a level of empathy and inclusion. So I find common characteristics in the DNA of both. So in your research, are there specific leadership traits and characteristics that help define these trailblazers that are really gaining market share and growing their businesses because they have a certain mindset that we should all aspire to reach?
That's a wonderful question, Vala. And yeah, Michael Blitz, who with Paul Daugherty, our CTO, author our Accenture Technology Vision, are amazing folks. And Andrew Wilson, our CEO, again, is a brilliant guy. And you're right. I mean, I think all good leaders are curious and want to learn and have their way of how they stay open to new learnings. And that, I think, is critical. Now, in the book, the way we looked at the subject of how companies move their culture and leadership from the old to the now to the new over time is we're encouraging leaders to look closely at the mix of, and I'm oversimplifying drastically, but the mix of entrepreneurs and operators. The logic being that entrepreneurs are great at finding new value, never taking no for an answer, you know, picking themselves up every time the product market fit doesn't work, and so on. And operators are great at running the business, delivering the results, delivering the numbers, keeping things tight. And actually, you need a mix of entrepreneurs and operators in each phase of your business, old, now, and new. Sure. And it's not one or the other. Now, how you create a culture that allows that is a big deal. And again, you know, an example I like to call out is when Walmart acquired Jet.com. That was not their first foray into Silicon Valley or incubation land or accelerator land or corporate VC and all the other things, most of which didn't materialize. But when they brought Mark Law, the founder of Jet.com, and they really rethought about, okay, how do you motivate entrepreneurs inside a big corporation? It's different from treating everyone the same. Right. It's recognizing that we all have different strengths and different gaps. And actually, you know, an overly homogenized approach to HR and management doesn't really work. And so actually they brought a lot of those entrepreneurs from that company into major roles of leadership. And if you look at Walmart's performance in e-commerce today, compared to what people thought would happen back, say, 5 years ago, 2014, it's much better and super strong. And, you know, when Amazon come out and say, hey, we're going to go to one-day shipping, part of the reason they've done that is because Walmart was already doing two-day shipping as well. So the thing that was super leading edge once upon a time, you know, others closed the gap. And so how you manage entrepreneurship alongside operatorship, because you need both, is one of the things I think about. But, you know, beyond that, having the humility, as you said, Vala, to be willing to be told you're wrong and to learn and so on. I mean, whenever you get overly narcissistic leaders, I always sort of start to worry for a company because then they might not be hearing what they need to hear. So
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, you know, you spend a lot of time, right, talking about the people factor, and it's, you know, the methodology is important. I think I asked you this yesterday a little bit, but you know, the methodology is here, the people factor is there, is also important as well. What about the finance part? You have a chapter talking about to finance, and what did I learn? Read this awesome book.
Thank you for the plug. guy. Appreciate it. We talk about working capital, and we also talk about investment in people, because that's a choice as well. And we're highlighting several aspects of the choices that people have to make. So, in terms of investment in people, I mean, the thing that you'll hear me talk about is the old compact between employer and employee. You can hire.
Come on.
Dating. We've all seen the story of Chia. What is, look, in a world fueled tech, digital, and AI disruption, the skills we all need, data scientists, everyone needs machine learning experts, those skills are not there. I mean, they just don't exist. So actually, the real question is, how do I not just adopt new tech, but how do I get my people to adopt and leverage the new tech? So reskilling becomes a core part of the investment. And when we look at AI investments in particular with companies, more than 70% say they're going to invest more in AI. Last year, we said to them, how many of you are investing in skills for your people to work with AI? The answer was 3%. This year, it's 18%, which is an improvement, but the gap is massive. So we think that part of the financial pivot is figuring out, how am I going to invest in my people to help them succeed? And so again, I ask you to look at what AT&T are trying to do with network engineers, and saying, look, networks are increasingly becoming software defined. So software engineering, software skills have a shorter life cycle. So how do I create a compact between employer and employee that the employer makes it incredibly easy for employees to learn digital training tools? In their case, I think they're working with Coursera and Udacity to build these big digital learning platforms. But then how do you create the management incentives and the people incentives so that people actually do the learning? And then as part of their learning, they re-qualify as network engineers every 4 years or whatever the time period is. That kind of construct we'll see more of. But the heart of the financial pivot says, it's back to the question I ask clients, how much are you investing in your new? So if you're an automotive company, how much are you investing in autonomous? If you're a life sciences company, how much are you investing in precision medicine and personalized healthcare? And the answer is they're all investing something. But what we've learned is you don't get to the new without massive scale investment. And the problem is so the trick is how do I manage costs in the core using innovation so I can free up investment capacity and then repurpose it to invest in the new? And that's the heart of the financial pivot.
And as companies are thinking about pivoting and developing perhaps new strategies, we mentioned Walmart. Walmart, when they introduced smart robotics to inventory their shelves, they were able to redirect 35,000 existing employees to personal shoppers. So new business model innovation, new incremental revenue source for them. As you're guiding, thousands of clients around the globe, how much of the time is spent today focused on modernizing legacy processes versus new business model innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Val, and I'm really happy you asked it. Again, the argument that we make in Accenture is, and I look to two of my colleagues, Bhaskar Ghosh, who runs Accenture Technology, and Debbie Polishuk, who runs Accenture Operations. These folks are responsible for running literally hundreds of thousands of people. And their argument, which they've done for real, so it's not a consulting exercise, it's an operational management exercise, is, they apply innovation and AI aggressively in our core operations to make our contracts more competitive, to allow us to deliver better value to customers. But they don't have to fire people. In fact, they have obviated tens of thousands of full-time equivalent roles, but then retrain people to higher purpose, higher order, more human tasks. If you listen to Manish Sharma, who runs a lot of our global operations, he'll tell you that a lot of traditional work was like inhumane, repetitive, mundane, boring. Like this modern technology can get rid of that inhumane stuff and get people to focus on things that customers really need and want, that require human cognition, human empathy, human emotion. And Paul, you mentioned him, Ray, our CTO, his amazing book that he wrote with Jim Wilson on human plus machine talks about the trick is to help humans work well with machines, because actually you can deliver more value and more outcomes for customers that help companies be more successful and therefore generate more employment. But it's the shift from yesterday's skills to tomorrow's skills that we think companies need to engage much more aggressively with than perhaps we see so far.
Yeah, you know, that reskilling and upskilling is going to be very important inside of every organization. I mean, some of these jobs have never been invented a year ago, 5 years ago, right? And it gets to that level. Hey, I got a quick question for you. I noticed communications, media, and technology are in one place. You run that group. What are interesting, there's a lot of convergence in industries and new industry business models. What are a couple of things that you've seen that, you know, people in communications might learn from the media side and the media side might learn from the technology side?
Well, I mean, that's a big question, Ray. I mean, I make a joke with some of my people and our clients that, you know, when I grew up in business, you know, if you go back even just say 10 years ago or before, all comms companies had the same strategy. It was basically build a pipe. That was the strategy. And, you know, there may have been a debate about how wide the pipe was or how fast it was or how pervasive it was, but it was basically build a pipe. Today, if you look at the communications companies around the planet, they're not on the same strategy. And some are more in the zone of they're going to be happy with the transport layer and they're going to be like the best network for 5G or something. Others are more like, no, they're going to do something in cloud and cybersecurity. Others are getting into content and they don't want to be over the topped anymore as they buy spectrum and pay for networks. They want to deliver
Forget OTT, we're going to own content, yeah.
They want to own it themselves. And so there are a range of different strategies out there. Now, the media companies, as you know, standalone broadcasters had a very tough time, linear programming, with the move to digital advertising, and frankly, the fickleness of consumers who have just better choices and more options, and they can move. You know, consumers are more liquid, and if you offer a beautiful experience the way Netflix does, which is good value, huge choice, easy peasy, whatever device, you just go there. I mean, it's so easy. And so I think a lot of companies in traditional mindsets, whether media or comms, have been grappling with that. Now, I think the issues are very well understood in the sector. And so people are getting more thoughtful. And so I think some of the games that we're going to see in the future say, look, if I produce an amazing series, rather than thinking only in terms of creative talent who create amazing series, I'm going to put them next to video game designers. And I'm going to put them next to AR, augmented reality technologists, because actually I'm going to create a new consumer experience, which, you know, if the series takes off, you, the customer, can interact with it. You can play with it. You can have a completely different kind of experience. So I think we'll see a lot more moves like that. In the telco space, you know, I think 5G is going to change the way they think about B2B space. So, you know, everyone's talking about direct to consumer in the B2C space. And yeah, sure, you know, with faster networks, we can live stream sports. It's better than the current version of the internet, and, you know, that'll be all good. And people will do that. But the B2B space, you know, what can you do when you have like almost zero latency networks inside an oil refinery or inside an operating theater in a hospital?
Robotic surgery.
It changes the game completely. And so I think we're going to see an emergence of an amazing array of, you know, creative, value enhancing use cases. But, you know, the next 5 to 10 years are going to be honestly more exciting than the last.
We're here with Omar Abbosh, Chief Executive, Communications, Media, and Technology at Accenture. He's just finished his new book. He's on tour, Pivot to the Future. I'm sure he's tired of hearing about Pivot to the Future. He's now in the middle of making the pivots happen. Thanks a lot for being on the show, and you can follow him at OmarAbbosh. Thanks for being on Disrupt TV.
Thank you, Omar.
Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you very much.
Terrific.
All right.
That was awesome. that was amazing amount of nuggets in that 20-minute segment, and we're going to continue with amazing insights. Our next guest is Liz Miller, Senior Vice President of Marketing at the CMO Council. Liz brings a varied career that spans over 25 years. She started when she was 10 in the marketing, sports, entertainment, retail, health, beauty, and personal care space. Incredible spectrum of knowledge. Liz joined the operating partner of CMO Council in 2006, leading the consumer marketing services engagements, quickly assuming the role of marketing and operations leader as the chief marketing officer today. As the Senior Vice President of Marketing, Liz oversees all business strategy, marketing research, program operations, as well as leading all research initiatives, content creation, product and service development, and authors many of the reports available through the council, which I highly recommend. You can follow Liz on Twitter at LizKMiller. Welcome, Liz, to Disrupt TV.
Oh, thanks, Vala, and thanks, Vala and Ray, for having me. I feel a little exhausted after my brain has just kind of exploded.
I'm with you.
After that segment, that was so amazing.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to put bombs to where like all of my people sit to like make them move around, right? Like that was amazing.
It was a great conversation. But hey, we're here to talk to you about what's going on. What's happening with these CMOs? Are these CMOs and chief digital officers ever going to get along? What's going on there?
They better, and they we gotta start someplace, and let's hope that they do start getting along. But I'm going to be super honest. I'm getting a little battle weary of when everyone asks if the CMO is going to finally figure out how to play nice in the pond, right? Because I kind of feel like we're getting picked on just a little bit, because I think that if the CMO isn't getting along with the CDO, I have to wonder. Is it because the CMO was actually told that when they were getting hired that they were going to be the CDO and vice versa?
And didn't get it.
Right. Like, who didn't get the memo and who didn't tell the right person the right thing? Because we, and I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, we actually interviewed about 100 CMOs and like literally sat down and had these one-on-one interviews with all these chief marketers who had just been hired within the last 6 months. We wanted to find people who had really short tenures. And we asked a simple question. Is the job you have today the job you accepted on day one? 85% said no.
Wow.
That's a problem, right? So if you took a job because you were like, this is awesome, I'm going to drive business, I'm going to implement digital transformation, I'm going to recreate the customer experience, I am going to be a revolutionary CMO. And then you sat down in front of your board meeting, and this was an exact quote from one of the people we interviewed, and the entirety of the board asked, why is our website the same color? Right?
Well,
like,
remember,
you got hired to change the logo, but what the job description was and the title is you are going to be transformative. You are going to drive business. You are going to lead and direct. So I think that right now, most CMOs that I talk to, and to be honest with you, most CDOs that I talk to really see themselves as being in lockstep and really see where, they want to define where those lanes are. They want to be able to say, here's how we get to the end goal, which is growth and profitability through optimized customer experience, right? If that's our defined end goal, you've got two seasoned executive leaders that are willing to get you there. If there's infighting, if there's still a battle, if someone's still looking at the CIO and saying, that's the land of no, I don't want to play nice with them, let's go get our own cloud infrastructure. There's something deeper going on. And I think it actually goes back to some of the conversations that you just had, right? Which is, did you not have a strong leader that led with empathy and understanding that they were leading people who need to have that clear understanding of how their strengths are leading what their job is?
That's crazy, right? Because the CEOs keep changing as well. And when they're like, hey, I want Pantone color number 2465C on my logo, you're in trouble, right? You're like, hey, what the hell is going on here?
Right. Like, here's an experiment. And I dare anyone to do this because I love doing it. Go to any CMO who is also saying, oh my gosh, I'm really struggling with my CDO, or I'm really struggling with my CFO, or pick another C-suite title. And then ask the question, when was the last time your CEO came in and asked you about Facebook? I guarantee you they've had that conversation. I guarantee you that they're within an organization where someone called from the board and said, my daughter told me about this thing called the Instagram. Are we on it?
Yeah.
Right, but my job description is to drive growth, right? So it just becomes that really awkward place. But, I also think it has to do a little bit with marketing as a function being on this really crazy journey, right? And you guys know this. This is both of, part of your own heritages and your own backgrounds, right? We've gone on this journey from being, I remember when I started in marketing, 25 years ago, we were storytellers and branders, right? We were the ones that were like, I've got the Pantone book. Who wants to figure out what color we're going to do today? Like, that's where we kind of all started. And that was cool, right? That's what the organization needed at the time. And, we were the ones that said, wow, when we print this globally, it's 5 different shades of blue. How do we unify that brand experience? Because that was brand experience at the time, right? But now, today's CMO is a business driver. Today's CMO is a customer champion. Today's CMO is, and it's supposed to be an orchestrator and an empowering force. but the organization quite hasn't gotten that evolutionary curve. Like they haven't seen like the, what is it called, the pit of despair or the, you know, the trough of reasoning, whatever it's called today. They haven't quite gotten the memo. So you've got an organization, a C-suite, a board, a stakeholder group, if you're public, that's still like, I don't understand why you're not the coloring in department. And really seasoned executives for the past 25 years have been like, I invented the internet. Like, let me get on this. So I think that there's a bit of a cultural shift. And there's a language shift. Like, Vala, I'm a huge follower of you on social, love what you post. And there's something that I noticed. You really talk so much about empathy and humanity and, you know, kind of a concept of kindness. But let's look at how marketers talk, right? When was the last time you sat in on a meeting and heard a phrase that kind of went like this? We're going to do a great campaign where we've targeted an audience and we're going to have this go viral. Okay, if we were allowed to bug Custer's meeting with his army about sending out blankets with smallpox, the same exact language would be used, okay? We are the only business function today that actively talks about targeting innocent human beings. Like we talk about segmenting and targeting and campaigns. We inherently adopt a language of war and violence and then wonder why no one believes we have empathy. Like, so I think
there was
there's
no
a little bit of a rebrand we need.
There's no conversion rate. What's going on? We didn't convert.
Right, where's, we don't turn around and be like, where's our ammo? No, we talk about like content, like we're gonna, and it's gonna go viral, and it's, you know, like what are we talking about? Like just in your next meeting, I would invite any marketer who's watching this right now. In your next meeting, sit back and take your marketer hat off just for a second. Just imagine you're out in a park, an innocent bystander, overhearing the conversation you're having in the room. Because the minute someone hears targeting, the FBI is being called, right? Like the minute someone hears, like, we're going to just blanket this and we're going to send out a blast and it's going to completely carpet this entire audience. I'm telling you right now, there's going to be a SWAT swarm around whoever's having that conversation in that beautiful park. But that's the language we use. And I think that's the expectation that we set. So now we're kind of wanting to be part of this kind of cultural evolution and really having a hard time doing it. So everyone thinks like we're the mean kids that they're not going to get along with.
Right. It's fun. And listening to you guys, I have fond memories of before I joined Salesforce, I was a CMO that rebranded a $700 million public company. And I changed the color of our logo, and I can tell you how many spirited discussions we had about the change color. It was a wonderful experience. I mean, branding a public company was a great experience for me as a CMO. So I want to know a little bit more about the CMO Council. Two-part question. Can you tell us a little bit about the CMO Council and why I wasn't invited to be a member? And then the second part is
I think it froze. I think she froze. Yeah. Like shake her up again.
You'll find like a ghost tap in the corner now, right?
And we know the language of business is finance, and so I think there's a lot of pressure from marketeers, especially in a digital economy where you can measure outcomes, for marketeers to own a share of the revenue responsibility. So if at random I grabbed 10 CMOs and I asked them, how many of you, not through attribution models, but you own driving revenue, maybe through e-commerce or whatever tools that you use, what percent of CMOs actually sign up for revenue responsibilities in companies today? So a little bit about CMO Council and how many CMOs are putting the art and science and the science and art to actually create incremental revenue for companies? Yeah,
well, that's, wow. Okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead and put that in the bucket of Vala just asked me to boil the ocean. That's totally cool. Awesome. So I'm going to go and like sit in a cone of shame later on this afternoon because Vala didn't get invited to be part of the CMO Council. And I'm just going to go ahead and sign you up. I'm just going to go ahead and create a member profile for you now, and now you're stuck. So every time we come to Boston, you're going to have to come to a dinner and like hang out with me. So sorry, not what you asked for. But no, so the CMO Council, it's really funny, you know, in the year 2000 when there weren't a whole lot of CMOs and when not a lot of marketers had that C in front of their title, but I think more importantly, when marketers were not being invited to have a seat at the table, right? When they weren't part of that strategic business conversation, there were a lot of questions that were asked about that. Like, how do we get a seat at the table? How do I get a C in front of my title? And the executive director of the CMO Council is a guy by the name of Donovan Neil May, and he is a persnickety South African, for those of you out there who know him. And he didn't want to answer the same question a billion times. So he took a bunch of people to dinner. And so the doors closed, and it was a bunch of peers who shouldn't have talked to each other, right? They should have sat there in total silence and talked about, like, Golden State Warriors scores, right? Like, they should not have talked. They were direct competitors. But instead what happened was they realized they were also all peers. And the conversation started, and they flowed all night. And at the end of the conversation, it was like, okay, well, you did this, you know, go do it more. And from 12 people sitting around a dinner table, we've now grown to over 16,000 senior corporate marketing peers around the world, and are probably one of the largest, peer-powered networks out there that are really just focusing on the mandates for that senior marketing decision maker, right? It's a very different mandate, but I think it really speaks to, Vala, what you were just talking about, right? I've been here for, 12 years, 13 years. So in Silicon Valley terms, like 1,000, kind of feels like that.
That's 5 companies, but go ahead.
Right, it's like S years, dog years, close, same thing. So there's a funny thing that's been happening. If you had asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said finance is the hot potato, right? Because we didn't, as marketers, understand how to communicate back to the business. It's not that we weren't measuring in terms of business. It wasn't that we weren't thinking in terms of growth, profitability, finance. You know, just take the telco industry as a small sliver. It's not that CMOs and telco weren't having conversations around churn and ARPU and all of the things that drove the business and drove the business mandate. It's that we didn't know how to communicate some of the marketing things that we were measuring and that what our agencies were coming back with, and we weren't translating that into finance terms that the CFO could respect. Not that the CFO couldn't understand, but it's that the CFO could respect, right? Because we were going in and being like, oh my gosh, we spent all this money on Facebook. We have 1 million likes. And the CFO would be like,
and?
yeah, hey, I spoke to you. But it didn't make any difference. So, I think that we have evolved our translation skills in being able to say, okay, as I look at social, as I look at that integration into omni-channel, and as I look at the rate of engagement, this is what this means for sales enablement, product development. This is what it means for shortened sales cycles. This is how we've been able to impact churn. This is how we're impacting loyalty retention and all of the things that add to profitability. So we've been able to talk about reduction in overhead, amplification of revenue generating strategies that cross the organization. And we've also been able to support other parts of the organization, including service, including supply chain, including commerce, with insights into the customer, into customer behavior that impact where and how they need to behave as well. Right. So as we've integrated and helped the organization become smarter about the customer, we've also gotten better in translating those things. So I think that today's CMO understands that finance is just part of our job. We get it. But I think that where we still see that struggle is how effectively and what sophistication we have in our level of translation.
You also got this new report out that's talking about marketing operational models and agency dynamics. Let's talk a little about that as well too, because I think that's hot on everybody's mind right now.
Yeah, it's launching next week. Actually, we got it coming out in like the next week or so. We've long talked about marketing operations, right? And I think that we went through this amazing phase in evolution probably about like 10 years ago, where everyone started thinking, okay, I've got all these great new technology platforms. I'm going to blame Vala's organization for part of that, right? We went out and got our Salesforce implementation. And we were like, we are going to be the most efficient, right? Because it allowed us to measure, it allowed us to track all of those things. But as with all things in marketing, we allowed the pendulum to swing from one extreme of no measurement, no understanding, zero cognition of what we have done. We've got a money tree out back, let's burn it. and then swung all the way over to almost the oh my gosh, I can't even say the word, operationalization.
Yeah.
Please don't ever spell that on Twitter, of marketing, right? So it's the same thing we've done with content, the same thing that we've done with creative. We went from all art to all science and then wondered where the art went, right? So I think what we're seeing now and what we saw through our survey is we're beginning to see a normalization of coming back to the middle. Because what's happened is when we ask people about their marketing operational structure, specifically through the lens of how it's enabling customer engagement at a local level. Does it help you be resonant and relevant on a global scale with that audience of one that does not sit in your neighborhood, right? So how is your operation structured to be able to do that? What we found is for people who are fully centralized, highly, highly efficient, they feel that they have the best ability to allocate and spend. They also feel super separated from the customer. They feel far away from the customer. They don't understand what the wants and needs are. They feel like they are too many steps removed, right? People who are highly decentralized, it's almost the opposite. They feel super close to the customer. They know exactly what the customer wants and needs. They have local expertise that can say, I know our market and I know how to enable our market to feel that connection with us as a brand, but I've lost some of the efficiencies and effectiveness. Decision-making takes longer. Cultural infighting comes more into play, right? So I've lost that operational effectiveness because of my decentralization. It's people in the middle. It's hybrid organizations who have enabled strategy to happen at the core and then execution to be influenced by that local market, that have allowed a little bit of both, that have allowed the pendulum to swing in the middle. Those are the people who say, I'm super close to the customer, I get what they want, but I also have that highly effective, efficient ability to spend wisely. So that also has translated into how we look at the agency dynamic, right? Because when you centralize all of your agencies and you've got the stranglehold in the middle, you haven't been able to tap into some of the local talent that a distributed network might have. So it's been interesting to look at because it's how our operational model has dictated how our agency model works and how do we bring all that together.
Very insightful.
Wow, super insights on marketing here from Liz Miller, SVP Marketing at CMO Council. You can follow her at LIZK Miller, MILLER. Thanks so much for being on the show and hopefully see you at CC as well.
Guys.
Liz, you crushed it. We could have spoken for an hour. Thank you so much. Terrific.
Thanks, guys.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Wow, Ray. If you just unpack the last 40 minutes and it's going to get even more incredibly intense in the last 20 minutes. It's our privilege to have Nicole France, Vice President, Principal Analyst at Constellation. Nicole focuses on digital marketing, sales effectiveness, and customer experience, intersection of all of those. Her research examines interrelationship between sales, marketing, customer engagement, and how to make it work effectively. With, again, over 20 years of experience as both technology analyst and a marketeer, Nicole has a very unique perspective on both the trends and the practicalities of effective customer engagement, which really, all the research at Salesforce tells us that, about 82% of customers, consumers believe the experience is as important, maybe even more important than your product or your service. So critically important. You can follow Nicole on Twitter at LNFrance, LNFRANCE. Welcome back, Nicole, to DisrupTV.
Thanks, Vala. Thanks for that kind introduction. And I will say, just following up on Liz's comments, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It is amazing. It is actually pretty amazing to think how we set ourselves up, particularly in marketing, to really epically fail when it comes to doing the things that really matter to customers. So maybe it is time for a change.
Absolutely. The fact that only 15% thought that the job that we're hired to do is what that's kind of shocking.
It is. It is shocking, and yet I have to say, from my own experience, and not at a CMO level, but at a senior operational level within marketing, that rings true. It's constantly a moving target, and that in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. I think the bigger challenge is being unclear on what the primary objectives really are. Because if you don't know what those are, all the operational stuff is really easy to get wrong very, very quickly. and spending a whole lot of money on the way, right?
Absolutely.
A ton of money, actually.
Yes.
So we're time for the halftime report, right? You at this point, like you got to be, you're halfway through the year. You've been through what, probably 10, 15 marketing conferences related on CX as well. What's going on? What's hot? What's happening?
It's a really good question, and it's something I've been thinking about because I'm planning to do a write-up where I'm sort of looking across all of these things because there's some really interesting themes that have started to emerge in my mind, and they're in a bunch of different categories. So some of them, as you might expect, are technological, right? So I would say AI is one of the big ones in all sorts of variations and forms and uses. One comment on that, I think there is definitely a lot of AI washing going on generally in the industry where things that are really more properly described as analytics get labeled as AI. And to their credit, I think most of the vendors out there that are developing these tools are trying very hard to sort of limit the boundaries around what they actually call AI, but it's a little bit of a runaway train, I think, at the moment. Having said that, I think on the upside, what is really fascinating is that some of these tools are really in a position where they've been in use long enough now, and they've got the data sets and the feedback loops going back into the algorithms as well, that we're really starting to see some very significant upside from using them. And that's everything from a lot of the natural language processing that gets used in digital assistants, which are, I think, actually a really important trend that I'll come back to in a moment as well. But also on the analytics side, really trying to understand patterns that are relevant in these data sets. And I want to be clear that what I think is often most effective is actually narrowly defining what some of those patterns are. And that really seems to be the consistent thread in all of this. If you're looking for, and we debate this, don't we, Ray, in our research meetings, if you're looking for general AI to come in and fix all your problems around customer experience, you will be waiting for quite some time to come. It's not going to be here anytime soon. My guess is not while I'm in a professional position to care about it. But the other really big thing, unsurprisingly, that is a major theme is data, right? Integrating these data sets, really having a more holistic and coherent view of all of the customer data out there. One of my observations about this is that what I think a lot of the technology vendors in particular are starting to recognize is that not all data is created equal. I think most of us know that. But if you're really looking at this from an enterprise-wide perspective, and that's actually, I think, another really important trend that we're seeing at the moment, this isn't about departmental systems. This is really about enterprise systems. And I think that's actually a pretty significant change, certainly from 5 years ago. I would argue even from a year and a half or 2 years ago. If you look at these as enterprise systems that are designed to support our interactions with customers, then we really need to think about that data in a very different way. And I think, we have in most organizations what I've started referring to as the data archipelago, because it's not even like you have a couple of islands, you got a whole lot of them. And there's not really a land bridge between them, right? So this is actually a fairly large scale challenge, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. But I think part of how we're going to address it on a practical level is to recognize that there are some things that need to be really tightly integrated, and there's some things that are more effective being loosely integrated. And not all data is created equal, and not all uses of that data are equally tight or equally important, right? So the context really matters. The other thing that I see is a very strong recognition that the interface and ease of use are critical. So this is where I come back to digital assistants, right? I mean, Vala, tell me if this sounds familiar coming from Salesforce. Salespeople really hate to use a CRM system, right? They don't like to, they don't want to, they will avoid it in every possible way, usually until the costs are high enough that it starts impacting their paycheck, and then they will typically do the minimum that's required to actually apply. So one of the things that is a very clear trend is I think there are a whole lot of digital assistants out there that are actually helping to really significantly improve the interface with the system to make it simple and straightforward, and frankly to increase the value to the individual user, typically, but not exclusively salespeople, that is really having a big impact here. And part of that is we're improving the quality of the data sets because we're getting better and more consistent and more timely use of the systems. And so there's a really nice kind of virtuous circle that occurs as a result of that, because you can do things like better sales predictions, right? When you've got better data in the system.
Absolutely.
So those are a few of the technology trends. I think the big overall thing that I want to leave you with, though, is this idea that, wait for it, customers actually matter. They matter a whole lot.
Wow.
And that maybe what we ought to be thinking about is customers and our ways of interacting with them instead of the technology. And I have seen that from a wide spectrum of different organizations, different technology vendors, services companies that are responsible for different aspects of supporting their enterprise customers and the way that they engage with their own customers. And I think this is, blindingly obvious, and yet oftentimes the things that are the most blindingly obvious are what we forget in the day-to-day. So I'm very heartened to see that actually this is coming back to being the really central focus. And I think it's important because, let's face it, the technology in many ways is getting easier and easier to use. So as organizations, we're less and less limited by the constraints of how the technology operates. And now that leaves us an opportunity to work on the really hard stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Like how we actually want those relationships with customers to look, and what we think, what we think is effective in terms of the types of business relationships we want to build.
For sure, for sure. I agree. I believe conversational CRM will be a catalyst for driving improvements in terms of data quality, because you will see benefit with the stakeholders that now use CRM in a more efficient way. But a great segue in terms of your commentary about understanding customers. One of the smartest documents I've read in some time was a brilliant article you recently wrote, which was titled 10 Signs You Have a Customer Understanding Deficit and 3 Things to Do About It. And you noted that, we talk about an experience-led economy, but without a shared understanding of a customer across the entire organization, it's impossible to design a consistent experience, much less one that you want. And I thought the table that you created, which was the 10 signs you have a customer understanding deficit with symptoms and cause, was brilliant. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then let's get into those 3 ways where we can reduce that deficit.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because a lot of these, all of these things are things I have seen firsthand in multiple organizations, and a lot of them I have heard about in the echo chamber in a lot of other organizations. So if any of these are unfamiliar to anybody, please tell me. I'm very curious. These seem like, if not endemic problems, certainly very, very common challenges. And I think they're really symptoms of the fact that as organizations, we've gotten very comfortable with operating in our silos or departments and not really looking at the bigger picture from a customer's perspective across all of them. So, one of those symptoms, for example, is that there's a lack of alignment between what marketing is doing, what sales is doing, and what customer service is doing when either of those departments bothers to think about customer service at all, right? And the simple fact of the matter is, it manifests itself in things as basic as, are we primarily trying to do upsell in our existing customer accounts and grow those accounts, or are we really prioritizing net new leads, new customers that we haven't ever done business before? That's actually a pretty significant area where you would like to think there's a high degree of coordination going on between marketing and sales. But the reality is, in many organizations, they have totally different objectives. And that's before you get to things like the sales comp plan, which might be completely different yet again, right? And there's not even a sense that maybe we would want to inform the customer service organization because they may, in some situations, be in the best position to actually start, some of those upsell opportunities or cross-sell opportunities, for example. So that's one. Another one that again ties into some of the stuff Liz was saying is sales does not trust marketing or any marketers to have contact with their customers.
Yep.
Right? There's always an excuse why you could never contact that customer for a reference, right? Or, why we can't actually let marketing set any direct invitations to that customer organization, anyone in it, period, right? It is especially problematic when you start getting to senior executive levels in a customer account as well, right? And even different parts of marketing battle over that for some very good reasons in many cases. But I think what it fundamentally comes down to is, as Liz said, so many marketers in certain organizations, perhaps more than others, are really so disconnected from customers that they don't really have a great understanding or feel for what's going on in those organizations. And I think that's one reason why sales doesn't want to let them anywhere close. They're afraid that they're going to have a conversation that's totally disconnected from the kinds of things that sales is already talking to them about. I think marketing
could even jeopardize the deal. It could even
they might jeopardize the deal. Exactly. The last thing you want to do is switch the customer off, right? Which is potentially a risk. I think the other reason that sales feels that way is that in a lot of cases, the marketing campaign activity that's hitting their customers, again, totally odds with whatever account plans they have, with whatever conversations they're having specifically with individuals in that account or organization. And so they sort of say, no, thanks. I'd rather do without.
Right. And your recommendation reminds me of one of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of them was begin with the end in mind, where you say, define what it means to serve your customer well, get consensus and alignment, because without knowing what success looks like, how does services, sales, and marketing deliver a beautiful experience to an end user? And I thought
Exactly. Well, and here's the really interesting thing about experiences, right? And I actually went back to the original Harvard Business Review article that was published in 1998, introducing the idea of the experience economy. So that's how far back we're going here, folks. Yeah. Totally the Analyst timeline, right? It takes, 15 to 20 years for these things to really become mainstream. Here we go. But what's interesting about that to me is, as the authors of that article say, experiences are inherently personal, right? So you can only control so much because ultimately it's down to the recipient and how they interact with whatever the experience is or how they perceive what's happening. The point that I like to make is, if you aren't at least actively thinking about this stuff and planning it, those experiences that your customers have occur by accident. And what's interesting about that is you got to wonder, if they're happening by accident, how many of them are good, right? I mean, surely if they're happening by accident, there's a pretty good chance that a lot of them aren't what you would want them to be. So absolutely, the starting point is define what good looks like. And it's a very simple thing that does not mean it's easy to do. And I think part of this is that also really should be something that everyone in the organization is part of and is equally responsible for interpreting in their own role within the company too. So having that clarity of purpose and clearly and frequently communicating that is important, but giving each part of the organization the responsibility to interpret that for themselves, I think is also key, which is actually one of my other recommendations, which is you really, as an organization, need to think about your staff, and I mean all of your staff, very differently. Because if you consider that anybody in your company may be responsible for a customer experience of some kind or a customer interaction that is ultimately part of an experience, you kind of want to empower your employees to do the best job that they possibly can, right? And partly that's about giving them access to the data and the tools to do their jobs effectively, but it's also about giving them a clear sense of what the priorities and objectives are and trusting them to make the right decisions. And I think, this is sort of what goes hand in hand with all of this technology change, is a real culture change. And Omar talked about it, right? I mean, this is about people change, culture change, as much as it is technology change and a shift in strategy. And it's about really understanding that in order to make all these technologies work, you really have to help your people to work with them more effectively too. Absolutely. And that's a big mindset change.
So my takeaway from your second recommendation was, if you're going to try to improve the customer experience, start with the employee experience. And you mentioned digital communication, cloud services, API, data analytics. You listed a number of technologies, tools in a toolbox that if your employees have access to these tools, they can be more empathetic, they can build their anticipatory muscle, and they can really, be in front of, delivering an experience that matters to all stakeholders, customers, employees, partners, communities you serve. So again, this is a must-read article from you, not just for CMOs or chief experience. This is a CEO read, because I think the advice you provide ultimately will become boardroom discussions if companies fail to put customer at the center of the decisions that they make. So brilliant. Thank you for writing it.
Well, thanks, Vala. I really appreciate that.
I learned a lot from it.
Well, we're live here with Nicole France, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. You can find her at LNFRANCE. Thanks a lot for being on the show, sharing your insights in terms of where we are mid-market in terms of the year for what's going on with CMOs and customer experience. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, guys.
Another brilliant appearance. Ray, you've surrounded yourself with super smart people. So I now know your secret to success.
That's the only way to do it. I'm getting dumber, that's all I'm telling you.
Yeah. No, again, you know, this is why Friday is our Ray and my favorite time of the week. And so we're not going to have DisrupTV next week, but we are going to have episode 151, where I believe we're getting close to 340 unique guests that we've had on our show. We're going to have Steve Scott, CTO at Cray. We're going to have Melanie News, Senior Vice President, Corporate Development at GS1 US. And we will have Brian Reese, who's one of my favorite guests, publisher at GigaOM. He's an author, he's a futurist. And I know every time Brian, you know, speaks to us, it just, you know, stretches our
Your mind explodes. I mean, it is great. So
he's a mind-stretching guest. So Ray, your closing remarks after episode 150. We did pass a pretty epic milestone today. Just for those of you who are watching, episode 150 of DisrupTV.
You know, 150 episodes. I think there's so much great stuff out there still. If you've got a great story, if you're a CEO of a startup, if you're a VC, want to talk about something new that's kind of happening in the marketplace, you know, if you're practicing out there, the CXO, this is the show. So definitely come on board. We're going to see, you know, we love to share these stories, hear what people are up to, and continue that on. So it's pretty good. And we
couldn't do any of this without our world-class producer, Aubrey Coggins, who, you know, again, Ray and I recognize how important and influential Aubrey is when she's not with us on a Friday. And afterwards, we call each other and go, you know what, we could never do this without Aubrey. So for those of you who are watching, you know, there's someone who ultimately makes all of this happen, and the magic doesn't come alive without her. So thank you so much, Aubrey, for hopefully another 150 episodes together.
Yeah, here's to 150 shows, and maybe Aubrey will do a sneak peek and say hi. But anyways, hey, thanks everybody. Thanks a lot for being on DisrupTV show. We've got Aubrey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aubrey. On behalf of all our watchers, thank you, Aubrey.
All right, take care.
See you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone.